2025 is here, we're now a few weeks in, and if you decided to learn Blender this year, then you may be wondering about where to start and how to be successful in this new adventure that is the vast Blender world, so you don't end up joining a large percentage of beginners who lose motivation and then give up soon after starting. In this case, this video is for you. But I don't want to just throw another list of big YouTube channels to watch at you, even though there might be some sprinkled in here and there. Instead, I want to focus on the learning itself and lay out a bit of a roadmap for complete beginners with 8 tips on how to learn Blender and be successful in your learning journey. Blender can be very overwhelming when you're just starting out, but if you follow these few easy steps, you will have a great start to that journey. So grab a beverage, sit back, and if you stick around until the end, I will throw in a bonus tip, which I think is the single most important of them all. Before you hit the road to Blender success though, you should ask yourself one simple question. Why? Why do you want to learn Blender? What's the goal you want to work towards? And what drove you to learning a 3D software to begin with? Is it animation, rigging, the game industry, VFX? Or do you want to learn to create sci-fi worlds as a concept artist? Think about this for a minute. Whatever the answer to that question is, that is your cornerstone, your fuel, the foundation for your learning structure. Something you can fall back on when times are tough, or you hit a snag, or you run out of ideas on what to do next. Now all you need to do is physically write that down and put it somewhere where you can see it and get reminded of it regularly. With that answer in place, you are now ready to start learning. And don't worry if you don't have an answer quite yet and just want to try it out. The guide still applies, although a specific goal will help lead to greater learning success. Tip number 1. Start with the basics. If you're a complete beginner, and you've typed Blender tutorial in the YouTube search bar or asked somebody on where to start, you'll have heard something like, well, just do the donut tutorial and you're good. It's all you need. Well, I disagree, and I do not recommend to start there. And yes, I'm ready to take some heat for what I'm about to say, because there is a bit of almost a cult around that donut. It's not like it's not a good tutorial series. It's okay in my opinion, but it's more of a long tech demo, which I don't believe is the perfect starting point. Especially if your long-term plans aren't at all remotely related to digital baked goods. And we'll circle back to that in a bit. In my opinion, by now the donut is to learning Blender what smoke on the water is to learning guitar. Everybody does it because it's been around forever and it's the thing to do. At the end, however, you know how to play a song with the most boring riff in rock history, but not how to play guitar. Same goes for Blender. Instead, I recommend a thorough introduction to Blender's UI and all the basic tools. CG Cookie has a great series for that on their YouTube channel called Blender Basics, an introduction to Blender 3D 4.x. And just like learning the scales and chords and where everything is on a guitar, you'll learn where to find everything and what each tool actually does. It might sound a bit boring because it's not a fancy project to follow along with, but it'll set you up a lot better for the future and make following other tutorials so much easier. Plus, your brain will not be overloaded right away with more complicated aspects of Blender, which only lead to frustration and can have actually a negative impact on your learning process. From there, you can then move on to more project-based tutorials. And yes, even the donut if you really have to. Tip number 2. Learn the fundamentals. There is no need to become an expert in every single aspect of Blender if you don't want to. As 3D artists, what we need to know depends highly on the niche we're going for. If you plan on doing motion graphics, you really don't need to learn necessarily about character design, for example. And that goes back to your cornerstone. And even most generalists have a certain direction and don't know it all by heart. However, there are 3 categories every 3D artist should learn: modeling, materials and texturing, and lighting. These are the fundamentals you should focus on at the beginning of your journey. Even if your end goal is just animating pre-made assets and never model anything yourself, understanding how objects are modeled, how topology affects deformation, for example, is vital knowledge you need to have to be successful and to troubleshoot if something goes completely haywire. The same goes for materials and lighting and how it interacts with each other. You don't need to become an expert in procedural materials, but have an understanding of how it works. So these three fundamentals are important for any direction you might go in the future. The usual suspect to learn about those, to name a few, are Ryan King Art or Grant Abbott's Get Good at Blender series is great. C. Bailey Film has a couple good beginner tutorials. And of course CG Cookie, who have Core, which is a series of courses that cover all those fundamentals in depth and more. The last one, of course, is a paid option. And that brings us to tip number 3, free versus paid. Now, with Blender being a free software, it's easy to think that solely relying on free content is enough to learn the software. And for some people that may very well be true. However, what free tutorials are often missing is a certain structure or depth. Courses usually offer a more detailed and in-depth guidance to specific topics, simply because they can take a lot more time to teach those things. For beginners, there are a bunch of free courses available. CG Boost has a great beginner course, for example, where you do a fruit bowl. If you're more into hard surface, there's a free beginner course by Blender Bros, and CG Cookie, of course, has Press Start. And once you get past that initial beginner's phase, and start to know your way around the software well enough to trend towards your ultimate goal, you might want to consider paying for courses every once in a while or subscribing to a Patreon of your favorite YouTuber. You'll get much more out of the tutorials and courses that are posted there, and most times you get project files that you can play around with and learn from, and you can focus more on the learning itself rather than an endless search for the right tutorial on YouTube. Or try a subscription to CG Cookie for a couple of months with their unbeatable amount of high quality content in virtually any area. And if you want to get that a try, you can use the code Sasha20 to get 20% off for the first 3 months. The bottom line though is, you might reach a point in your Blender journey where free tutorials just won't deliver the expertise you need anymore, and then paid courses are something you're going to want to look into. Tip number 4. Refine early. Once you have the basics down, it's time again to look at your cornerstone and the end goal, and then immediately fine-tune your learning path. Let's say you're into creating low-poly models and game assets. A hard surface beginner's guide is probably not the right thing to do. Same if you plan to do ArcViz with Blender, then why make pastry? So, in order to make the best of your precious time, try to find a beginner series that trends towards what you want to do, like Grant Abbott or Polygon Runway for low poly scenes, or the Zero to Hero series by iMesh if you want to do ArcViz. You'll always have a more efficient learning experience if what you learn from aims directly at your ultimate goal, and you'll get to where you want to be faster, because your brain will respond better to content relevant to you. That's just a natural response, and we'll get to that in a little bit. Also, through those resources, you usually get steered further into the right direction, whether that's through more advanced tutorials by the same people, or similar tutorials the YouTube algorithm throws at you, or you'll learn about in-depth courses. But refining early will help you get in the fast lane and stay on track with your goals. Take it from my own experience. When I first started out, I dabbled in all kinds of stuff. I made swords, I made logos, some motion graphics and robot animations, and I felt I was getting nowhere. It wasn't until I took another look at my cornerstone and started focusing my learning almost completely on ArcViz, and things started clicking. That way I went from beginnings like this to now renders looking like this pretty quickly, considering the time I have available. But refining my learning led to greater learning success, and it will for you too. And I'll be back with the rest of the tips after this brief message.
Welcome to Knobs and Bolts, the ever-growing asset pack for high-detail photorealistic decorative hardware for your next ArcViz project, compatible with both Cycles and Eevee. Decorative hardware might seem like a small detail, but it has the power to completely transform a scene. From farmhouse chic to modern minimalist, a well-chosen knob or pull can dramatically change the look and feel of a scene. It not only adds functionality, but also enhances the overall aesthetic, tying your design together seamlessly. Without these elements, even the most beautiful render can feel incomplete. With them, your designs gain character, depth, and a polished professional finish. Transform your renders today with the perfect finishing touch by adding this asset pack to your library. Knobs and Bolts, decorative hardware for ArcViz and Blender, is available now. Download today and elevate your projects to the next level. Links in the description.
Tip number 5. Find a community. Something you'll realize very early on in your Blender journey is that the Blender community as a whole is a very friendly, accommodating and helpful place. So don't be shy to put yourself out there. And I know that can be daunting to some people. Believe me, I'm not the most outgoing person myself, but opening yourself up to the Blender world is going to benefit you greatly in your learning process. So an important step to take early on is to look for a community where you find like-minded people to engage with. A place where you can showcase your artworks and get hopefully constructive criticism that will help you improve on your work, and where you can just ask for help with problems when you hit a snag. Getting positive feedback, and yes, suggestions for improvement should be considered positive feedback too, will trigger a response in your brain, which in turn will help you stay motivated and tell you to keep going. Same goes for help. Rather than searching endlessly for the right tutorial that answers a specific question, you can ask that question in a community and get help with your specific problem. As a bonus benefit, a good community can also give you a certain sense of accountability. If you discuss your goals and progress there, and people engage with you about these, it will trigger your brain into action and you'll feel motivated to actually get going on those goals because you've publicly stated them. And whether that's subconsciously or consciously, you don't want to have to admit that you're not working on those. BlenderArtists.org is one of those places. CG Boost has a good community. And of course, many artists and groups have Discord servers, which can be great for that. Gleb and 80 from Creative Shrimp have one that's very nice. ArcViz specific, I can recommend iMesh. And of course my favorite, CG Cookie, where you'll always find a helping hand, friendly feedback, and it's just a place where you can just hang out and chat about what we love doing. It's where you'll find this old dude all the time too. So if you want to engage with me, that's where you'll find me. But don't just take my word for it. If you look at their video asking if it's worth, you'll see some of the responses from the community about the community. And an environment like that will definitely help you thrive and improve your learning curve. Tip number 6, use your time, brain, and energy wisely. This is a big one. Learning Blender, or anything really, is a brain exercise. And we should treat it like any other physical exercise. If we do it right, our brain pours out a healthy dose of dopamine and makes us happy. Yay! It helps us keep motivated, sparks creativity, and it makes it so much easier for our brains to process what we've learned later when we sleep. But we also run the risk of overdoing it, at which point we don't get that dopamine anymore and instead get fatigued or even stressed, resulting in new information not getting processed and stored long term anymore. Which is to say that too many tutorials and courses might end up slowing your progress or even hurting it. I speak from experience, believe me. So when I was going through a phase like that the last time, I put the question to the community. How much time is ideal? We could not find definitive consensus. At least not on an ideal time frame. However, that does not mean that there's not a right answer to that question. It rather means that it is dependent on you as an individual and the time you have available. We did agree on one thing though. It's important to use your time wisely and also take rest. Especially in the very early stages of your learning journey, you'll likely spend the majority of your time with tutorials and courses just to get started. But right away, you should make it a habit to split off a chunk of your available time to just practicing what you've learned so far outside of a tutorial by just playing around. Even if it's just creating a strange shape by using a couple tools like inset and extrude. And as you get more proficient, you can make that chunk bigger and bigger and bigger until you maybe have a 50-50 ratio or even better. You'll eventually get to a point where you can just create whatever it is you want to create and only need tutorials when you hit a bump. One good way of doing that, for example, is after you finish the tutorial, use the techniques you just learned there to create an alternate, individual version of said tutorials with different shapes, different materials, lighting, whatever. Be creative about it. It will also minimize the risk of getting stuck on Tutorial Island, where you're completely lost for your own ideas without getting any guidance, and creativity just completely flatlines. Of course, regular practice is important, but just as important is taking breaks. Even during a learning session, breaks can greatly benefit you and can extend the time you'll be able to learn that day. It's important, however, to make those breaks count. Relax the muscles. That means no doom scrolling. That doesn't relax the brain. So rather take a short walk around the block. Sit back, look out the window for a few minutes. Something that relaxes you and your brain completely. You'll feel refreshed and your brain is ready to take in some more information. Or take a full day off. Stay away from it. Go out into nature, play a game, consume content you like that sparks creativity and motivation. You'll notice you'll get more done the next day. Ultimately, it'll be up to you to determine the right balance. Because only you know how much time you have available and how long you can take in new information before you need a break. You might just have to go through a bit of a trial and error phase. Just be sure to be patient and give yourself a rest here and there. And despite your best efforts, you might get stuck at some point or another. Losing motivation, struggling to come up with any ideas, it'll almost certainly be the case. It happens to everybody and it sucks. In that moment, take a step back, take some time off and away from it, recharge. It'll come back. And if it doesn't after a while, it's a good time to look back at your cornerstone now. Go back to the roots and remember what got you excited in the first place. The reason why you got into Blender and what motivated you to learn it. What did you do or to consume to make you want to do this? Those moments are the reason why it can be so helpful to have that cornerstone. There's no reason you can't branch off of it along the way, but being able to go back to that can spark the same regions in your brain again and fuel up the tank. And before you know it, you're back on the road. Tip number 7. Don't get hung up on version numbers. Blender is evolving at an ever-accelerating speed. Nowadays there's almost a new version coming out every other month, at least it feels like it. So one of the most common things I hear from beginners is the question of when a course or tutorial will be updated to the newest version. And it's one of the biggest mistakes you can make early on. Making tutorials and especially courses is a very time-consuming process, trust me. Constantly updating them to all the newest Blender versions is simply not feasible. Nothing new would ever be released because everybody's just trying to catch up. But just because a tutorial has been made with an older Blender version doesn't mean the information in it doesn't apply anymore. Sure, hotkeys and layouts and even shaders change over time, but the principles behind the workflow usually don't. I know of people who still use Blender versions from before the big 2.8 UI overhaul, and they make art just as incredible as the ones with the newest versions. Luckily, every Blender version ever released is available for download, so it's easy enough to download the version the tutorial is made with and follow along with that. Otherwise, especially as a beginner, your learning process will constantly be interrupted by trying to find replacements for hotkeys, menus, shaders, etc. It'll completely scramble your focus and prevent the information from being processed properly. And the worst thing is, you will miss out on so much great learning content if you insist on only watching tutorials with the newest versions. Imagine you want to learn how to make realistic human heads. Undoubtedly, the best course out there for it would be Human by Kent Trammell, made with Blender 2.8. It took Kent almost 2 years to develop that course. Impossible to keep updating it for every new version. However, the core information and workflows shown in this course are as valid today as they were a couple years back. The same goes for Martin Kleckner's environment course. So don't get hung up on version numbers as a beginner. Rather, download the version of the tutorial and work with that. Over time, you'll get proficient enough to follow older tutorials in newer versions because you'll know your way around Blender well enough. And even then, It's never wrong to use the older versions anyway. Tip number 8. Pick your poison. Or teacher. We in the Blender world have one great and to a certain extent unique advantage. We can choose who we learn from. Bet you couldn't say that in school or uni. And you should make full use of that as much as you can. Because we are programmed to receive information a lot better when it comes from someone we like or we can relate to. If we don't like someone, our brains tend to put up barriers as a natural defense mechanism, and it's harder for information to get through. And that applies to teachers as well. If you watch a tutorial on YouTube from someone you haven't seen before, and you discover you're more thinking about the person and something that annoys or bothers you, rather than focusing on the information in it, then this may not be the right instructor for you. There's nothing wrong with that, and it doesn't say anything about the instructor per se. It's just natural. I'm pretty sure there's people out there that don't like the way I teach, and that's okay. I've watched tutorials from people who really know their stuff and make exceptional art, but I found the tutorials so tedious that my brain just didn't save any of the information. Lucky for us, the Blender world is full of people who do similar works. And if you don't like the teaching style of a certain creator, there's likely someone else you can try who does the same or very similar stuff. Probably right in the suggestion box right beside the video. Or under, or wherever YouTube decides it needs to be at any given day. The bottom line is that we have a vast selection of creators out there, and choosing the ones you like will trigger positive reactions in your brain and make the learning more efficient and more fun. And fun is the most important thing of all. If it's not fun, then why do it? If you made it to this point, thanks for hanging around, and as promised, now the single most important thing besides having fun. Don't compare. Never compare yourself to others. That is one thing I cannot stress enough. Take in art from all kinds of people. Admire it, take it as inspiration, take notes from it, and even strive to get to that level one day. But never look at somebody's work and then at yours and say, that is so much better than mine, or this guy achieved so much more in the same time I've been learning. What am I even doing? It's the worst thing you can do to your mental health. And the reason why you shouldn't compare yourself to others is astonishingly easy, because you don't know their circumstances. They may have more time than you, more resources. Maybe they have a background they don't publish that helped in their journey. Whatever it is, it doesn't really matter. It's out of your control. It'll just drive you crazy, frustrate you, and inhibit your learning process. It can get as bad as getting you to quit. And who wants that? If you want to draw comparisons, compare yourself to yourself from yesterday or last week. If you see an improvement, even the tiniest, that is success. And if you don't, that's okay too. Keep practicing. Only worry about the things you can control and never compare yourself to others. So there's my little guide for how to approach learning Blender. Of course, they aren't rules. And as I said before, ultimately, it comes down to you as an individual to decide what path is best for you. But I really hope these tips will help you be successful in your Blender learning journey. And even if you disagree with some of it or all of it, and it just sparks a debate, that means you're actively thinking about the process and don't just blindly stumble onto the road. And that might ultimately get you on the right track too. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.